If you're in our audience, you know that I've been covering the Trump-Russia story on the program for a while. I've covered events related to Russian interference in the 2016 election, possible coordination between Russia and members of the Trump administration. It's news. It's worth discussing on a program that deals with American politics. And I've made every effort to cover it in a way that doesn't make unreasonable assumptions or where I act like I know things that we just don't yet know. In other words, I try to make clear what is fact, what is speculation, and what is circumstantial. And if you watch the show, you know that for a long time I've been getting emails from a contingent of the audience that questions a range of the topics that relate to Trump and Russia. What's my justification for believing this? What do I think about that? So I thought it would be good to sort of sort through and do a rundown of the facts regarding everything Trump-Russia and how all of this informs my outlook on the entire story. This is more or less a response to people who deny certain indisputable facts, but also people who say that certain speculations are totally baseless. So let's start by laying out 4 things that I solidly believe to be true. Number 1, Russia interfered in our election in 2016. That is undeniable. Whether they flipped the results is another story. Number 2, there are some currently known facts directly supporting the notion that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Certain facts already definitively tell us this for sure, but the evidence is limited at this time. Number 3, given an entire array of other facts about countless other matters, any reasonable person should be able to admit at this point that it would be miraculous if there turned out to be no other coordination between the Russian government and the Trump campaign in addition to what we already know. And number 4, and this might be the most important point, denialism about Trump-Russia by default should be put on hold until the investigations have concluded and the findings have gone public. Journalists and members of the public don't have the legal authority that Congress, the FBI, and other intelligence agencies have to dig for evidence. We can very reasonably assume that there is a ton of deeply relevant knowledge about all of this that's just not in the hands of the public yet, and claims that there was no collusion or that there is no evidence of collusion are meaningless as long as all that information is still behind closed doors. And by the same token, no one should make definitive pointed claims about there being collusion yet either in the context that there is not yet enough evidence. All I can do is talk about what we know and give what I believe to be justified interpretations of each piece of the puzzle. So let's start with what we know, starting with Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Amazingly, there are somehow still some people who deny or have doubts that Russia even interfered in the election at all, including our president. But there are some pretty obvious reasons why Trump wouldn't want to admit any of it. So let's start by recreating that timeline. In September of 2015, the FBI called the DNC to tell them that their servers had been compromised by hackers affiliated with the Russian government. And the FBI said it was the same group of Kremlin-connected hackers who had for years been hacking the White House and State Department, and the DNC basically blew off the warning. In April of 2016, the server attacks became more apparent to the DNC, and their top officials were alerted for the first time, and they hired private independent cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike to investigate, who also independently determined that the DNC was attacked by hackers affiliated with the Russian government. In June of 2016, the DNC told the public they were hacked by the Russian government, and the next day, an anonymous person online calling themselves Guccifer 2.0 came forward and said, no, CrowdStrike is wrong. It wasn't Russia who hacked the DNC. It was me, and I'm just a random Romanian guy with no connection to Russia. I hacked the DNC to expose the Illuminati. Guccifer also posted authentic DNC documents, which proves that Guccifer at some point had access to DNC servers or is affiliated with someone that did. And cybersecurity experts and US intel have said that Guccifer was likely a false flag created by Russian intelligence to deflect blame. And this wouldn't be the first time that Russia has created a fake lone hacker to divert blame for their hacks. And Guccifer discredited themselves in a number of ways, which supports the notion that Guccifer is acting on behalf of the Russian government. There's reasonable justification for assuming that Guccifer is a Russian invention. But even if Guccifer is Romanian, and it happened that Guccifer was inside the DNC's computer systems at the same time as the Russians, Guccifer's identity doesn't change the conclusions of the U.S. intelligence and several private cybersecurity firms that the DNC was also hacked by Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear, two hacking groups known to be tied to the Kremlin and famous for hacking Russia's adversaries. So back to the timeline. Over the course of June 2016, CrowdStrike's conclusions that the DNC was hacked by those two Russian groups are corroborated by other private, independent cybersecurity firms, including ThreatConnect, SecureWorks, and Fidelis Cybersecurity. July of 2016, 3 days before the start of the Democratic National Convention, WikiLeaks publishes tens of thousands of hacked DNC emails. Guccifer said this was going to happen. The emails humiliate the Clinton campaign, humiliate the DNC, and lead to the resignation of the DNC's chair, CEO, CFO, and communications director. It is clear that those who were responsible for this were only interested in making the DNC look bad and hurting Hillary Clinton's chances of winning the election. Julian Assange has denied that Russia was his source for leaks, but Assange might not even know who gave him the documents. And let's keep in mind that Assange used to have his own TV show on Russian outlet RT. And we know that Assange has long disliked Hillary Clinton. And Assange was recently caught haphazardly offering opposition research on a Democratic U.S. senator to someone who was pretending to be Sean Hannity on Twitter. So it's no secret that both Russia and Julian Assange have it out for the Democratic Party. In October of 2016, the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Defense released a joint statement. The U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. We believe, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. Next month, in November, 2 days before Election Day, thousands of more hacked DNC emails were published, and clearly whoever coordinated the hacking and the publishing of the DNC emails chose to time things out in a way that would be most damaging to the Democratic Party and the Clinton campaign. Also in November of 2016, NSA Director and Commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, Mike Rogers, blamed the Russian government and attributes motive. Quote, "There shouldn't be any doubt in anyone's mind this was a conscious effort by a nation-state to attempt to achieve a specific effect." In December of 2016, the CIA tells the Senate that it's quite clear that people connected to the Kremlin hacked the DNC and interfered with the 2016 election, specifically with the purpose of helping Donald Trump win. A week later, U.S. and foreign intelligence officials tell ABC News that Putin was personally involved in the DNC hacks and other efforts to interfere with the 2016 election. These anonymous U.S. and foreign officials say that they were directly involved in tracking the hacks. January 6, 2017, the CIA, FBI, and Office of the Director of National Intelligence release a joint public statement saying they've concluded with high confidence that the Russian government hacked DNC emails and published them through WikiLeaks with the goal of helping Trump get elected, and that all of this was directly ordered by Vladimir Putin. In February of this year, Trump's own Secretary of State tacitly admitted that Russia interfered in the 2016 election by hacking. So you can't just say, oh, it's all Obama's intel people who are manufacturing hysteria around Russian hacking. It wasn't just Obama-appointed people in intel making these claims before this anyway. And also, in February of this year, Jeanette Manfra, who's the head of cybersecurity at DHS, confirmed that not only did Russia target voting systems in 21 states, which we already knew, but that Russia succeeded in at least some of those instances. She said that these hacks, no doubt, came from the Russian government. Russia also recruited an army of trolls and bots to influence public opinion via social media, which is supported by a mountain of academic research, journalism, testimony in Congress, and criminal indictments. That's probably the least controversial truth in all of this, so I'm not even going to waste more time on that. Russia is well known for hacking and otherwise trying to interfere with the affairs of adversarial governments, political parties, and elections. Why wouldn't they try to do this here in the U.S. in 2016 in order to help a presidential candidate that has been conspicuously sympathetic to Russian interests at every stage of the election? You can say, I'm a shill for the Democratic Party or a shill for corporate media or whatever other nonsense you want to say. Many of the people who say those things about me may not be aware that I am constantly extremely critical of the DNC and the Democratic Party on this program. I do not defend the DNC and their corruption. I don't defend what was found in their leaked emails or their treatment of Bernie Sanders during the election. I come to you as someone without a dog in this fight, as someone who doesn't pull punches when it comes to Democrats in the DNC. And I will be the first to admit that outlets like MSNBC and the Huffington Post maybe are guilty of some of that. But what we've got to understand is that many Bernie Sanders supporters have a grudge against the DNC for their treatment of Bernie, so they want to believe that the email leaks were righteous and coordinated by good faith actors. I'm a Bernie supporter with some of those same grudges, but I'm not going to let that blind me from what the evidence points to, which is that Russia was responsible for hacking and leaking the DNC documents and emails. And totally understandably, many Trump fans also don't want to believe Russia hacked the DNC because they don't want to believe that Trump had an unfair advantage in the election, and they definitely don't want to believe that the Trump campaign may have had knowledge or involvement with Russian interference in the election. A plot by the U.S. intelligence community and the private cybersecurity industry and the press to falsely blame the hacks on Russia would be a much bigger and far less believable conspiracy than Russians hacking Democrats. Both Democratic and Republican members of Congress agree that Russia hacked the DNC and influenced the election in other ways. Republicans want to deny almost everything about Trump-Russia, but they've had a lot of trouble denying that. No one can ignore what motivations Russia would have for doing this. No one can ignore Russia's horrible relationship with the Obama administration. And regardless of whether there was Trump-Russia collusion, it's impossible to deny that Trump implicitly and explicitly was going to be a more pro-Russia president than Hillary Clinton. And Russia is almost certainly very interested in making the U.S. look stupid to the world, which, by the way, has been another result of Trump's victory. And Russia succeeded in making our electoral process seem vulnerable and disordered. They had every reason to try to tip the election in Trump's favor because it was a win-win-win for Russia. As far as collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, like I said, very little is known right now, but we have to reserve most of our judgments for when the facts come out. Facts that at this point in time are in the possession only of the Justice Department and the Congressional Intelligence Committees. Here's one instance of apparent collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government that we know about, at least an attempt at collusion. June 9th of 2016, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort, literally the head of the campaign, met with a Kremlin-connected Russian lawyer for the purpose of receiving dirt on Hillary Clinton. Before the meeting, Trump Jr. was informed via email that this dirt was part of a Kremlin plot to help Donald Trump. Less than a week earlier, Trump Jr. received an email from an intermediary representing a senior Russian government official, and Trump Jr. knew he was talking to someone representing the Russian government. The email to Trump Jr. said in part, quote, "This would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump." Donald Trump's Jr. response was, "If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." The intermediary wrote back to set up Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian attorney. The Russian attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, is well known for her work on behalf of the Russian government to advocate for the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Russia. The Trump team and the Russian lawyer did not just sit around talking about the weather that day, and long after the fact, Donald Trump Jr. was caught lying about the meeting. Not only is this attempted collusion with the Russian government, but it might violate federal law, which states a foreign national shall not directly or indirectly make a contribution or a donation of money or another thing of value, or expressly or impliedly promise to make a contribution or a donation in connection with any federal, state, or local election. It shall be unlawful for a person to solicit, accept, or receive a thing of value from a foreign national. And by the way, this is just totally secondary. Steve Bannon later said that the chances of those Trump campaign officials not introducing the representatives from Russia to Trump while they were in Trump Tower are zero. And when I say that this was attempted collusion, I'm not saying for sure that it was only an attempt, but I'm saying it was at minimum an attempt. The Trump team could have been very successful in colluding with Russia that day, but all we know for certain is that there was an attempt. And you can write this off as no big deal, but 90% of what matters in this particular situation is intent. So let's talk about people associated with the Trump campaign. You have to be naive to dismiss what we know about the president's associates, the people that he and his campaign chose to become involved with, and their connections to Russia, their criminal histories in some cases, their blatant, desperate attempts to lie about and cover up their dealings with the Russians both during and after the campaign. Michael Flynn, by the time he was hired as a top advisor to the Trump campaign, was already known for his close ties to the Russian government and had been criticized for it by people from all over the political spectrum. Flynn illegally lied to the U.S. government about money he had received from the Russian government. Flynn spoke to Russian Ambassador Kislyak several times during the Trump transition and lied about it. One of those calls was on the same day the Obama administration announced sanctions on Russia, and Flynn was forced to basically admit that U.S. sanctions were discussed during the call. Jared Kushner, during the Trump transition, discussed with Russian Ambassador Kislyak the possibility of using a Russian consulate to set up a secret and secure communications channel between the Trump team and the Kremlin in order to hide their conversations from American intelligence. This was at a meeting between Kushner and Kislyak at the beginning of December of 2016 at Trump Tower. Jared Kushner has also lied to the U.S. government about meetings he had with Russians. Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort has a long history of both criminal activity and loyalty to Russia. From 2006 to 2009, he was paid $10 million a year by Putin oligarch Oleg Deripaska to secretly help influence politics, media, and business in the U.S. and Europe to benefit Russia. And for nearly a decade, Manafort was paid to manipulate Ukrainian politics to benefit Russia, which involved receiving laundered Ukrainian tax dollars stolen by pro-Russian politicians in Ukraine. Manafort currently faces federal charges in the U.S., including conspiracy against the United States, money laundering, not registering as a foreign agent, and lying to the FBI. Because of intercepted communications and payments from Russia during the Trump transition, Manafort has been under investigation for the past year by several U.S. intelligence and law enforcement agencies and was the subject of FBI wiretaps before, during, and after the 2016 election. 2 weeks before the Republican National Convention, Manafort offered private briefings on the election to Putin oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Manafort said in the email, if he needs private briefings, we can accommodate. And again, this is another example of what we have to wait and find out about before we go dismissing. These emails are among tens of thousands of communications and documents that the FBI has that the public does not. But Manafort is a confirmed person of interest in the DOJ's Trump-Russia investigation. Trump campaign advisor Michael Caputo had previously worked on a Russian propaganda campaign in the U.S. to improve Russia's image among Americans. Trump campaign advisor Jeff Sessions had to recuse himself from his own Trump-Russia investigation after it was discovered that he lied about meetings he had with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. Trump campaign advisor Carter Page has a long history with the Russian government and is also under FBI investigation, and he's known among his peers as an outspoken critic of U.S. foreign policy and a strong Putin sympathizer. Page has been known for making public comments in Russia criticizing the U.S. and praising Putin. A U.S. diplomat to Russia who knew Page said that he has always been a brazen apologist for anything Moscow did. From 2004 to 2007, he worked in Moscow as a banker and as a consultant to an energy company owned by the Russian government. And in 2013, he helped Russian spies in New York City gather information about sanctions and energy plans. In July of 2016, during the election, Page went to Moscow to meet with Russian officials, and the Trump campaign, including Jeff Sessions, were aware of this trip before and after it took place. For the year and a half that followed, Page and the Trump campaign lied, saying the meeting never happened, including Jeff Sessions, who lied about it to the U.S. Senate. Also in July of 2016, Page met with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak and lied about that as well. Trump campaign advisor Sam Nunberg has confirmed that Trump campaign advisor Carter Page was colluding with the Russian government, and he believes that the Justice Department has Russia evidence against Trump specifically. George Papadopoulos was a Trump campaign advisor who one campaign official said interacted with the Trump campaign constantly. In March of 2016, Trump identified Papadopoulos as a campaign advisor and said he's an excellent guy. Papadopoulos stayed influential throughout the election and was even responsible for setting up meetings for Donald Trump with world leaders. In April of 2016, Papadopoulos had a meeting with a Kremlin middleman who told Papadopoulos that the Russian government had dirt on Hillary Clinton, including thousands of emails. In January of 2017, Papadopoulos lied to the FBI about his meetings with Russians and then immediately tried to delete all of his emails he had with Russians. He's since pled guilty to lying to the FBI and is now cooperating with Robert Mueller's investigation. At the very, very least, the Trump campaign was filled with criminals, people tied up in Russian interests, and people who were constantly having meetings with the Russians and lying about it all the time. In January of this year, a member of the House Intelligence Committee's Trump-Russia investigation said that members of the Trump administration committed crimes during the 2016 campaign. In February of this year, another member of that committee said that they have, quote, an abundance of evidence that there was Trump-Russia collusion during the campaign. And as far as the Department of Justice's investigation, you might be saying, oh, the investigation's corrupt. The FBI and Mueller are corrupt. What about the Nunes memo? The Nunes memo to Trump didn't change anything. It didn't prove that the Steele dossier was an important part of the FISA applications against Carter Page. Never mind the fact that more and more of the dossier has been proven to be true. The Nunes memo made a lot of other unproven assertions. Nunes didn't even see the documents he wrote about in the memo. There's nothing that proves the FBI acted improperly at any point. The FBI said the memo was bogus, and the Democratic memo refuted every single thing in the Nunes memo, which essentially gets us back to square one in terms of knowing who to believe. The point of all this, some of what I've discussed here is evidence of collusion, or at least facts that strongly support the notion that there was collusion, and some of it is circumstantial but important to keep in mind for the time being. But what the knee-jerk Trump-Russia deniers are demanding as further evidence of collusion would only come out in court proceedings, which have not yet happened. Most of these conversations about whether or not there was collusion simply need to be put on hold until the investigation is over. Another thing to keep in mind is that Trump himself did not necessarily need to be personally involved with Russian actors or even need to be involved with conversations with staffers about coordinating with Russia for there to have been collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. If you're a member of the Trump campaign and you're coordinating with Russia to get dirt on Hillary or to promise things to the Kremlin in exchange for election interference, most likely the last thing you're going to do is keep Trump himself updated for a number of reasons, mostly because it wouldn't be necessary, and it would be sort of stupid to legally implicate your candidate and the soon-to-be president. Trump-Russia collusion is not defined by Trump himself plotting, participating in, or even having knowledge of the collusion. And setting this burden of proof is unnecessary, and it's often done so disingenuously. Trump has proven to merely be a figurehead when it comes to policy and when it comes to rhetoric. He's not a real thinker or a mover. Why wouldn't the exact same circumstances apply to collusion? I'm not even denying that the potential collusion could have been very low budget and improvisational. I've never claimed that this was all part of some grand scheme that started 20 years ago, where the Kremlin has been planning for decades to install Donald Trump to serve their interests. I'm not even saying that if there was collusion, the Kremlin had to have been plotting as far back as even 2014. That's probably not what would have happened. That's the caricature of what collusion would look like. That's the straw man. But you have to ask yourself, why would Russia go to such lengths to help a candidate that would do nothing for them? The Russian government would not do all of this unless they felt certain that it would be in Russia's interests. And why does Trump feel so obligated to stay loyal to the Russians? When it comes to Russia, Trump has constantly praised Putin, refused to implement U.S. sanctions on Russia, refused to admit the obvious fact that Russia infiltrated the American electoral process. The list goes on. What we know is that Russia wanted to tip the election in Trump's favor. We know that the Trump campaign was aware of at least that as early as June of 2016, and many Trump campaign associates had private meetings with Russian officials or people tied to the Kremlin, which they lied about, and we only know about the meetings that have so far been uncovered. That's what we know. What we don't know is pretty much everything. That's the key point here. We know all of this, and it's all very shady, but in the bigger picture, we still know almost nothing. Only the people participating in the investigations know anything. Even if we ignore the multiple congressmen involved with the House investigation who came out and said, we've seen evidence of crimes and collusion, even if we ignore the ties between Russia and the Trump team members and all of the lies and all of the indictments, we have to acknowledge that we are currently only in the middle of this saga, and no one knows what will happen because basically nothing much has even had the chance to happen yet. The Trump White House and Trump supporters and other Trump Russia deniers say, oh, well, we don't have anything. Something would have happened by now, so Trump Russia is nothing other than hysteria. It's not true. This is meant to be an extremely slow process. It has to be in order to be effective. Investigations like these often take years, and the people conducting these investigations are intentionally and carefully keeping the details of what they're learning under wraps. We're just going to have to wait to find out. But in the meantime, yes, we should not make hasty accusations regarding specific circumstances and situations, but it would also make absolutely no rational sense to assume that there's nothing to the story, given what we already know, and given that the investigations have not yet even had the opportunity to tell us what actually happened.